I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a route I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side, with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and as usual at this time of night around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road, just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy. First of all, he seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with the hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" "Just up the road," he said, in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. Jeep Wranglers have very tight seals on the doors, so when he tried to close the door the first time, it didn't shut. I politely said, "Oh, the door didn't shut. Just open and slam it shut real hard. These doors are hard to close." The body language he was giving off in response was unsettling. About 3 seconds after I had finished my sentence, he looked at me, then turned his head slowly to the right, and again waited 3 or 4 more seconds before finally opening the door and slamming it back shut. By the way, this guy was moving. I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So how far did you say you are going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze hitting me like a brick, and all the while, I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it is just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant, I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign. What followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm, next to 3 other scars from previous, assumed self-inflicted cuts, and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There is something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line, and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay, man. Let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air, and backed away slowly from the door. He, too, left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. And I urge everybody, and anybody, that if you, by some chance, see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them. I should have just driven past her. The thought comes now, sharp and sudden, like the burst of a forgotten dream. But then, I was just trying to get home. Like anyone else, the road stretching in front of me like a long tunnel, dark and endless, except for the slashing headlights and the rain. She looked like she was shaking from the cold. The rain was coming down hard, but she wasn't moving. Just standing there by the side of the road, a small, hunched figure. She was holding something close to her chest, bundled tightly in what looked like a thick blue blanket. The shape was too still, too perfect. It made me uneasy, but I couldn't explain why. I slowed the car, rolling the window down just a crack. The wind pushed in, thick with damp air and the smell of wet asphalt. "Please," her voice came, muffled by the wind, barely above a whisper. "Can you help me? My husband left us. We're stranded." Her face was pale, eyes wide and wild like someone who had seen too much. Her lips were cracked, her skin tight over the bones. "I just need to get to the next town. It is not far." I glanced at the rearview mirror. The road was empty, quiet. It wasn't a busy stretch, just trees, hills, the occasional flicker of streetlights, the kind of stretch where you wouldn't see another car for miles. I shouldn't have stopped, but I did. It wasn't even a question. When someone's desperate, it pulls something out of you. Empathy, maybe, or just weariness. I unlocked the door, and she stepped in without a word, her coat dragging against the seat as she shifted. The blanket stayed in her arms, the weight of it pulling at her shoulders. The smell of wet wool mixed with the car's musty interior. "Thank you," she whispered as she settled into the seat. She didn't look at me, her eyes locked on the fogged-up window. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. The quiet was stretching between us, the kind of quiet that makes the rain seem louder, heavier. She didn't answer right away, her gaze still distant. Finally, her eyes flicked to mine, but only for a second. "I don't know anywhere. I need to get away." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. The road was long, and the rain kept falling, a steady patter against the windshield. I glanced at her again, but this time I noticed something strange. She wasn't holding the blanket like a person would hold a baby. It was clutched too tightly, as if something inside it didn't belong there. I shook the thought away, focusing back on the road, but then the headlights hit the side of her face, and I caught a glimpse of her eyes, too wide, too unblinking. It wasn't just exhaustion. There was something more, hunger. My fingers tightened on the wheel. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The smell of wet wool grew stronger, more pungent, as the air inside the car grew stale. "You're sure your husband just left you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No one else is with you." Her smile was thin, barely there, like a crack in ice. "Just me and the baby." I nodded, my eyes flicking to the blanket again. It didn't move, not even a little shift. It didn't seem right, but I didn't want to think about it. I couldn't explain why, but I felt the creeping edge of fear in the pit of my stomach. I tried to dismiss it. The silence was thick now, not just the rain but the tension in the air, like something was waiting to happen. Her breath came softly, almost too quietly, and I could feel the weight of her gaze, even though I didn't look at her. I had to look at her again, though. I had to. I reached over to steady her, just as the car made a sharp turn. I brushed against the blanket, my hand accidentally pressing into it, and that was when it hit me. The blanket was cold. I pulled my hand back, like I'd touched something dangerous, and the realization crawled down my spine. There was nothing in the blanket, not even the faintest hint of body warmth. Nothing that could explain the way she held it. I felt my pulse quicken. My head started to throb with the unmistakable feeling of something being wrong. Why had I not noticed earlier? I stole another glance at her face. Her eyes were still fixed ahead, but this time I saw the faintest smirk curling her lips, just enough to make my blood run cold. I should have slammed the brakes right then, should have tossed her out of the car, but something held me there, like I was frozen. And then I heard the click. It was so quiet, almost lost in the engine's hum. But I heard it. The click of something sharp, something cold being drawn from the folds of her coat. "Keep driving," she said, her voice low and controlled, like she was savoring the moment. "Give me your phone, and maybe I won't have to use this." Her hand was stretched out now, the glint of the knife catching the light just enough to make me flinch. I didn't think. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, the car lurching forward with a violent roar. Her grip on the door handle was white-knuckled, but she didn't try to stop me. Not yet. I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, the high beams shining on her like a ghost in the night. Her eyes were wild, her lips pulled back into something between a smile and a snarl. But it wasn't a smile. It was something darker, something predatory. I didn't look back. The road stretched ahead, endless. The engine roared louder, the tires screeching as I sped away. The windshield wipers worked overtime, but the view was still blurry, as if the world outside had started to warp under the pressure of my panic. The car was too small, too suffocating now. The stench of wet wool clung to the air, and I couldn't shake the image of her standing there, alone, holding nothing. Just a blanket, a trick. The road was empty, the trees closing in on both sides, like they were waiting for me to slip up. The engine growled, and I could feel the weight of the car behind me, the terror sitting heavy on my chest. But I didn't stop, not even when the gas station light flickered in the distance, signaling civilization, signaling safety. It felt too close, like I wasn't out of the woods yet. In the rearview mirror, I saw her again. Her face was still there, watching me. But she was gone now. I shouldn't have stopped. The whole thing felt off from the moment he slid into the passenger seat. But I told myself I was just tired, that I was imagining it. After a long shift, the last thing I wanted was to drive all the way home by myself. So when the guy flagged me down on that empty stretch of road, I made the mistake of thinking he was just another lonely traveler, looking for a lift. The radio was humming softly, a mix of old rock ballads and country tunes. I could hear the crickets outside, the slight rustle of trees in the breeze, but inside the car, there was only the steady drone of tires on asphalt. I glanced at the rearview mirror to check the road behind me. Nothing but dark stretches of the highway for miles. He didn't say much at first, just introduced himself with a simple, "I'm Vince." His voice was steady, almost too polite, but I was too tired to read much into it. I nodded, told him I was Chet. We drove in silence, the landscape outside flickering past, fields and hills turning dark as the sun dipped lower, dragging a chill with it. I glanced at Vince every so often, his hands resting on his lap, a slight bounce to his foot that matched the rhythm of the music. The road curved slightly, and that's when I saw it. The sign like a dark omen looming out of the twilight. Warning, escaped convicts. The faded white letters screamed across a rusted, jagged sign. I didn't think much of it at first. Prison break stories were a dime a dozen, especially in the backwoods. But Vince's sudden shift in posture caught me off guard. His foot, which had been tapping along to the music just seconds before, stopped mid-motion. He didn't move again. I didn't hear the steady hum of his foot against the floorboard anymore. It was as if the air had thickened, and I didn't know why. I thought I saw his fingers twitch, but when I glanced at him, I realized he had clenched his fist around the seatbelt. His knuckles were pale against the fabric. I should have been paying more attention, but the music was still on, and I was too distracted by the fact that the road ahead was getting darker. The headlights of the car swept across the gravel, creating flashes of light against the trees. Still, the silence felt wrong. There was an unsettling quality to it, like the kind you feel when you are not sure if someone's watching you from behind. I reached for the radio, about to flip the station, but before I could, Vince's voice broke through the stillness. "There's a trail up ahead," he said, his tone flat, almost rehearsed. "Not far. You should pull off." I swallowed. Something about the way he said it, like he had expected me to pull off the road, made my chest tighten. I tried to dismiss it. I was just tired. But the way he said it, like I had no choice, sent a jolt of unease through me. "I think we're fine on the road," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hand was already slipping to the keys in the ignition. "We can just keep going." Vince didn't respond. He just stared ahead. Then, a slight flicker of sound, a crackling on the radio, followed by a voice, clear but urgent. "This is a special news bulletin," the broadcast interrupted. "Authorities are searching for 2 escaped convicts from the Eastern Correctional Facility. Last seen on foot near Route 10. Drivers are advised to avoid the area and report any suspicious activity immediately." The static continued for a moment, and the news anchor's voice was drowned out by the soft hiss of the radio. For a split second, the dread hit me like a punch in the gut. "Pull off," Vince said, his voice cool. But there was a hard edge to it now. His fingers, still clenched on the seatbelt, tightened even further. There was no room for debate in his tone. Now, my foot moved before my brain could stop it. I turned the wheel. The gravel crunched beneath the tires, and the car slid off the road. I had no idea why I obeyed him. I didn't want to, but there was something in his voice, something sharp and insistent, that made me act against my better judgment. The car rolled to a stop, and Vince was already out the door. He didn't wait for me to open it. His boots kicked up dust as he stepped out, and I sat there, staring at the darkening trees and the empty road. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint smell of something burning, maybe distant wildfires. It was like the world outside the car had gone dead, and I was alone with that nagging feeling that I was doing something I couldn't undo. I sat for a moment longer, not sure what I should do. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I had just let the radio report get to me. I glanced at the empty seat next to me, where Vince had been. His jacket was still crumpled on the seat, the leather creased and worn. I reached for the door handle, but before I could open it, I heard something, a sound, a crack. Then, the unmistakable clink of metal against glass. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Then I heard it again, a sharp, distinct sound of something heavy striking metal, and I knew. I didn't see him. I couldn't, but I knew. The next thing I felt was cold, ice cold, a thudding impact against the back of my head that made the world spin. Then, blackness. When I woke up, the world was upside down. My head felt like it had been split open, the pressure like a vice around my skull. I gasped, trying to pull myself up, but everything was spinning. I was on the ground, dirt under my hands, the sharp scent of pine and decay filling my nose. My chest tightened, and panic surged through me. I pushed myself up slowly, feeling the heavy weight of my body refuse to cooperate. My fingers fumbled, touching the dirt beneath me, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The car. My car was gone. The last thing I remembered was Vince's voice, smooth and low, his hand clutching the seatbelt, his eyes cold, like he had already made a decision for me. He had taken the choice out of my hands. I tried to get to my feet, but something caught my eye. It was the glint of something small in the grass, half buried under the dirt. I crawled over, feeling the sharp scrape of rocks against my palms as I reached for it. It was a wallet, a woman's wallet worn at the edges, the leather cracked. I could see the faint remnants of a name on the 499 Sarah, but that wasn't what sent the chill down my spine. It was the fact that it wasn't mine. The panic that had been slowly creeping through my body turned into outright terror. I wasn't the first. I wasn't even close. Vince had been here before. He had done this before, and now he was coming back. The storm had already set in by the time I stepped outside, its bite sharp, like it was eager to draw blood. The night was thick with it, snow falling in heavy, constant sheets, the ground muffled and soft beneath my boots. The wind scraped at the edges of my coat, gnawing at my exposed face, making my fingers that dangerous shade of waxy white. The sharp, cold tang in the air felt suffocating, as if the storm was a force that had a mind of its own, pushing me further away from everything I knew. I wasn't planning to leave, but the fight had been ugly, too ugly. The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, and once they were in the air, I couldn't take them back. The anger, the tension, it clung to me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. I wasn't supposed to leave, but the argument followed me like a shadow. So I walked, away from the house, away from the words, and away from the fear gnawing at the back of my throat. The snow whipped against my face, relentless, unforgiving. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed the cold to clear my head. That's when I saw it, the truck. I hadn't heard it pull up. The sound of the engine had been swallowed by the storm, but the red glow of the brake lights caught my eye. The truck was sitting there, idling just a few feet from me, a dark silhouette in the storm, its interior a faint halo of light, a perfect beacon of warmth and escape. The door clicked open. A man, maybe in his 30s, looked out from the driver's side, his face partially illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. He wasn't anything remarkable to look at. Dark hair, clean-shaven, average build. His smile, too wide for the moment, was a little too polite. "You lost?" he asked. His voice smooth but not quite natural, like it was rehearsed. I paused, unsure. The storm was unbearable now. I could barely see the street beyond the truck. The world around me reduced to blurred outlines and swirling snow. The wind bit at my exposed skin, pushing me toward the truck, toward the warmth I could feel radiating from it. I didn't answer right away. There were too many questions I couldn't ask myself. Too many red flags I ignored. Too many thoughts spinning in my head. But I couldn't let the cold swallow me. Not here. Not now. "Yeah," I muttered, my teeth chattering slightly. I'm just looking for a way out of this mess." He nodded, and for a second, the strange tension in the air seemed to ease, like we were both caught in the same storm, but for different reasons. "Where you headed?" he asked, his hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. "A few miles out," I said, offering as little information as possible. "Good enough," he replied, smiling again, that too polite grin stretching across his face. "I'm headed that way. Hop in." I hesitated. There was something about his smile, something wrong about it, but the wind howled again, and the cold nipped at my skin, desperate and biting, and I knew that I couldn't stay out here, not alone. Not like this. I opened the door and slid in. The heat of the truck hit me like a wave, a sharp contrast to the brutal cold outside. The interior was almost too clean, too perfect. No dust, no debris. The air smelled faintly of pine, artificial and sharp, as if someone had placed a little air freshener in the dashboard, just to keep the place pristine. There was a small pine tree, air freshener swinging rhythmically from the rearview mirror. The motion almost hypnotic, a perfect metronome ticking away the seconds. I glanced at him again, trying to make sense of the feeling clawing at the edges of my mind. But there was no answer there. Just the same unremarkable man, or so it seemed. He turned his attention back to the road, the truck moving smoothly over the icy pavement. There was a calmness to his driving that unsettled me, as if he'd done this 100 times before. There was no tension in his movements, no hesitation. He was completely at ease. "So, you from around here?" he asked, his voice as smooth as the steady hum of the engine. "Not exactly," I replied, keeping my eyes on the road outside the truck. I didn't want to give him too much, just in case. He glanced over, his eyes catching mine for a fraction of a second. "Not many people are," he said, his tone too casual. "You'd be surprised how many I've picked up tonight." My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, the faint outline of my reflection, catching my attention. I could still feel the pressure of his gaze, the way he was studying me without ever letting on. The words came out before I could stop them. "You know, it's nice to find someone willing to help out." The words felt hollow as soon as they left my mouth. The truck's heater hummed louder, as if in response, filling the space between us with its steady drone. "I'm a good guy," he said, his hands adjusting the heater vents with a meticulousness that struck me as odd. "I wouldn't tell you if I was a bad guy, would I?" The words hit me harder than I expected. They didn't make sense at first. But then the action, the way his fingers moved so deliberately, almost obsessively, as he adjusted the vents, made my stomach twist. Something in his eyes shifted, something dark. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but the air seemed to thicken in the truck. His smile never wavered, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were different now, colder. As if he were something more than just a man, more than just a face, more than just the air freshener and the sterile cleanliness around us. Something was buried beneath all of it, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the knot that was tightening in my stomach. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You ever wonder how you know if someone's good or bad? I mean, it's not like we wear signs, right?" I turned my head, pretending to look out the window, but I couldn't help it. The air felt too still now, too quiet. "You know," he continued, his tone taking on that odd, placating quality again, "I could be anyone, but I'm not. I'm a good guy, really." I stopped breathing. The words rattled around in my chest, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My fingers tightened on the seat, and I stared out the window, the snow still falling in its relentless, controlled descent. The storm outside felt like a mirror to the stillness inside the truck. "You know, if I was a bad guy," he said, the smile still in place, "I wouldn't be telling you this." His hands moved, adjusting the heater again, the motion so meticulous, so deliberate. The image stuck in my head like a photograph, the way his fingers hovered over the vents, never quite relaxed. The words hung in the air, uncomfortable and dangerous. I had to get out, but how? The truck slowed as we neared my destination. The world outside was a blank canvas of white. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my palms were clammy against my coat. I couldn't think. My mind was too full of his words, of the too perfect cleanliness of the truck, the unnerving rhythm of the air freshener swinging, and the hollow, empty sound of his voice. But before I could move, before I could even think to say anything, he glanced at me again, a strange look in his eyes. "You know," he said casually, "I know exactly who you're going to." My breath caught. "That friend of yours? Her mom? She knows who I am. She's got some pretty interesting stories about me." I blinked, the world going still around me. And that was when I realized Steve wasn't just anyone. The next day, I learned the truth. His name wasn't just a name. It was a warning. And the clean-cut face I'd seen in the truck, it was the same one plastered across old newspaper clippings, under the headline, "Convicted Violent Offender." I hadn't just been picked up by a good guy. I'd narrowly escaped someone who would have ended my story with nothing but a footnote.